The year was 1947. The British and their allies had recently emerged victorious in World War II, but there were some heavy losses. They lost thousands of soldiers and even more money. It was getting costly to maintain their vast and global empire. It was time for India to become an independent and self-governed nation. The partition of India brought independence and freedom to a nation that had wanted it for decades, but it also brought conflict and chaos that hasn't been forgotten. India was split into two nations, Pakistan and India.
Pakistan was a predominantly Muslim country, while India was a nation with a majority of Hindus and Sikhs. The great nation of India was split due to religious differences and divides, which was the cause of the horrific violence that ensued.
It is reported that 200,000 to 2 million people were killed, and 14 million people were displaced and uprooted for their homes. This event was one of the largest mass migrations in history.
Conflicts first began 100 years before India would gain independence. In 1858, the British government took direct control of India. At this time, it was normal for the stronger countries to take over weaker countries with goals of imperialism. This made the people of India angry, but it took a long time to begin the struggle for freedom.
The Amritsar massacre was a crucial turning point in the fight for independence. On April 13, 1919, General Reginald Dyer fired on civilians part of a peaceful demonstration. 379 people were killed that day, and this sparked the desire for rebellion.
At a time of crisis for the Indian people, Mahatma Gandhi came into the picture. Gandhi is regarded as one of the greatest freedom fighters of all time. He fought for independence, but had one defining policy: nonviolence. An example of his leadership and sacrifice for the greater good came with the Salt March of 1930. The salt tax of 1882, imposed by Britain, strictly prohibited the people of India from collecting or selling salt. Instead, they were forced to buy their salt from the British with a heavy tax. Decades later, Gandhi knew there needed to be change. He started a salt walk, a peaceful protest where Gandhi and his followers would take salt from the seawater to protest the tax. Over 60,000 were arrested, including Gandhi himself, but the Satyagraha, mass civil disobedience, continued.
Due to the peaceful protest led by Gandhi, the British knew they couldn't do anything to stop him. He was gaining a strong following in India that would be hard to contain. In the early 1930s, following Gandhi's release from prison, the British held conferences in London where the British leaders spoke with Gandhi and other members of the Indian National Congress about the Constitution.
The Indian National Congress was founded in 1885. It was the first nationalist party in India, and after control of the party was given to Gandhi, it became the leading group of the Indian independence movement. Some key members of the party that were important factors later on in the push for independence were Jawaharlal Nehru and Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Nehru was a Hindu politician who became loved throughout India for his plans for a secular and independent India. He was the apprentice of Gandhi and became the president of the Indian National Congress in 1929. Jinnah was a Muslim politician who initially was a leader of the Congress, but eventually led the All India Muslim League. He was regarded as a great politician and was respected by the British.
When the British had taken control of India, they separated India into 11 provinces, and elections were held to determine which Indian party ruled in each province. By the elections of 1937, Jinnah had already left the Indian National Congress due to political differences, so he became the main opponent for Nehru's Congress as the leader of the All India Muslim League. He had abandoned his ideas of Hindu-Muslim unity and had a pro-Muslim agenda if his party won the elections. Unfortunately for Jinnah, the support that Gandhi had gained for his fight for independence led to huge support for Nehru and their ultimate victory in the election. This election was a turning point because it completely isolated the Indian National Congress and the All India Muslim League from each other, which set the precedent for a potential partition.
By 1940, Jinnah was determined for an independent Muslim state. With the Congress gaining heavy traction with the people of India, Jinnah feared that the Hindu-led Congress would oppress the Muslims as the British have done to the Indians. In the Lahore Resolution of 1940, Jinnah officially announced his claim for a separate Muslim state.
World War II had already begun, and the British weren't doing so well against the wrath of Adolf Hitler. In order to gain more troops and supplies, the British forced the Indian Army battalions to fight against the Axis forces. This enraged Nehru and the Indian National Congress, which in turn put them in prison. As the war went on, the Muslim League gained more support, and when the war ended, it was time for an election. In the 1946 elections, the All India Muslim League won an equivalent amount of seats in the government as the Congress. Nehru and Jinnah, the presidents of the parties, couldn't reach a power-sharing agreement, which caused internal conflict between the Hindus and Muslims.
Due to the strength of the independence movement and the government parties, the British had realized that their time in India had come to an end. It was too costly for them to keep their rule over India, so on February 20th, 1947, Lord Mountbatten, the British ruler of India, met with the legislative rulers of the Hindu, Sikh, and Muslim communities to declare that India would be partitioned into two separate dominions, a Hindu India and a Muslim Pakistan. By July 18th, the plan had received confirmation from Britain, and the execution of the plan began.
The most crucial part of the partition was the geographic separation of the soon-to-be independent states. The British brought in a man named Cyril Radcliffe, who created the Radcliffe Line, which separates India from East and West Pakistan. The Indian states of Punjab and Bengal had the majority of Muslims, so these states were where the border was created.
After all the formalities were settled, it was time for an official partition. On August 15, 1947, India and Pakistan were separated into two independent dominions, ending a struggle for independence that had lasted centuries.
However, the independence came with a heavy price. 14 million people became refugees, seeking a home in a new nation based on religion. The Hindus who were living in Pakistan left for India, while many Muslims living in India left for East or West Pakistan. The religious-based migration was the root of the unforgotten and horrific violence that ensued.
The Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims, who had coexisted for centuries, turned on each other, and savage and unruly violence began. Women were raped, children were murdered, anyone of the opposite religion were slaughtered. On occasion, people would burn trains carrying refugees, and the trains would arrive at the station without a single soul alive. Due to the massive scale at which violence occurred, the range of deaths goes from 200,000 to 2 million.
Bodhraj Sopti, my grandfather, experienced the partition firsthand and shared his memories with us.
The severe impact on our family was that we got the refugee status. Moreover, on migrating to Jammu, we were kept in a refugee camp where the facilities were very rare and we used to sleep in open sky.
As the violence of the partition ceased, more violence emerged as the First Indo-Pakistani War. This war was fought over the territory of Kashmir, a land that was unevenly split during the partition. Kashmir had an even amount of Muslims and Hindus, but India got more of the land in the partition. The war was fought from 1947 to 1948, and India won. This was the first of 4 wars fought between both nations.
In 1965, Pakistan began another war for Kashmir, which they lost yet again. The third war, fought in 1971, has been the most significant conflict between both nations. During the partition, Pakistan was split into 2 sides, East Pakistan and West Pakistan. The east side was always oppressed by the West Pakistanis, so led by their leader named Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the East Pakistanis began a civil war for independence. The West Pakistanis had the military advantage over the weaker east side, but India joined the war after a few months of civil war and helped the East Pakistanis defeat the west side and gain independence for East Pakistan. East Pakistan is now known as Bangladesh.
The last official war between India and Pakistan was fought in 1999, and once again, Pakistan lost in a conquest for Kashmir. Since the Fourth War, there hasn't been an official war fought between the nations. However, there have been many border skirmishes and some extreme cases of Pakistani-infused terrorism in India. In 2011, a Pakistani terrorist group attacked various hotspots in Mumbai, India. Almost 175 people died and many more were injured.
To conclude, the independence and partition of India and Pakistan has had a great impact on the Indian subcontinent. The initial success of the nonviolent peaceful protests for freedom turned into violent and hate-filled relations between the two new nations. Overall, the partition of India was a struggle for independence that changed the lives of millions of people in the Indian subcontinent.